in Connecticut here today, near the town of Groton. And on this ground here, I'll just kind of walk around a little bit. This is certainly a cemetery with many burials from many years ago. It's also, this cemetery right on this site was the location, the place of the first Baptist church that was established in Connecticut. And so that church location in later years moved away from here, but certainly this cemetery, you see it's well maintained, still is able to get into. And I just want to point out, among others, this one important gravestone here. And I will say it's interesting that this grave is actually formed like a pulpit. So this is Valentine Wightman, 1681 to 1747. If I stand back here, you can see on this gravestone, this is a Bible, and so it is a grave marker in the form of a pulpit. Here's why that to me is so interesting, is because Valentine Wightman, who at the age of 23 was called to plant the first Baptist church here in Connecticut, moved from Rhode Island. He looked back certainly on the life of his great-grandfather Edmund, who in England in 1612 was a bold preacher and preached that the Church of England was not observing the Lord's Supper or baptism the way that the Bible taught, and that Christianity, in the way that it should be, wasn't fully practiced within the Church of England. Well, in 1612, of course, that would have caught the ire of the monarchy there, and so his great-grandfather, Valentine's great-grandfather, Edmund, was arrested and imprisoned and then executed, burned, for his preaching there at that time. And certainly that truth and standing for truth extended down to Edmund's son, and then his grandson, and then to Valentine, who was the great-grandson of Edmund Wightman. And so Valentine here we see was born in 1681. By this time his family had moved to Rhode Island, and he's called as a 23-year-old young man to pastor. And you can see from the marker here, a pioneer of religious liberty, because at that time Connecticut was still certainly heavily influenced by the standing order, the Congregational Church. They were interested in kind of keeping status quo for the way that they conducted church and church life, and these outliers, these Baptists of religious freedom and liberty, didn't set well with them. And so Valentine had to take some really bold stands through the course of his life in the fight for freedom, especially in his 20s. His first few years of the pastorate was great conflict, and he was and his small congregation were asked to leave. They wanted them out of the state. They wanted nothing to do with them, but he persevered through governmental challenges that really threatened the ability for them to even gather together in Connecticut. And so you can see here that he served as pastor, founded the church here on these very grounds in 1705, and then for 42 years pastored the First Baptist Church, Groton, the first church in the state. Now we go back to a great heritage of the Wightmans, because not only did Valentine look back to a great-grandfather Edmund, who was executed for preaching the Bible in England, so he looked back to a great heritage, but not only that, but he was able, and we are able to look forward in his life to the fact that after his time of the pastorate here, his son Timothy pastored the church after his father's passing from 1754 to 1799, and then Valentine's grandson John Gannot, another great Baptist name, John Gano, right? The chaplain there, the Baptist chaplain in the Revolutionary War era that Washington gave his battle sword to. So John Gano Wightman, named after that notable Baptist, he then took up and pastored the church from 1800 to 1841. We have a 125-year heritage of the Wightmans, a father, son, grandson, pastoring the same church right here in Groton, Connecticut. There's much more to talk about with regard to the Wightmans. I'll mention one last thing. Valentine, his wife, also came from a noble heritage of faithful preachers. Her maiden name was Holmes, and her grandfather was Obadiah Holmes, who we have come to know as the man that went to the whipping post there in Boston and received those 30 lashes on his back, from which we get the notable statement, after that was concluded, "You have whipped me as with roses." And so certainly Valentine's wife's grandfather and his testimony, his character, his determination had a wonderful influence on the Wightman family. I have no doubt but that Valentine wanted to pass that same spirit along to his son Timothy and to his grandson John Gano. So a very interesting place, a beautiful, quiet spot here in Groton, Connecticut, where we can look back and really be reminded of a faithful man, stayed the course at his post at one church for 42 years, and then a son, and then a grandson. What a blessing to consider the heritage, the Bible heritage of the Wightman family here in Groton, Connecticut.